Welcome to Between the Covers, the show for readers and writers and lovers of books. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a publisher at Red Penguin Books, where we publish books of all types and genres. So, whether you have a book in your head, a manuscript ready to go, or even 300 pieces of loose leaf shoved in a drawer, please visit us at redpenguinbooks.com and unleash your inner author. And yes, probably about once a month, I get an entire envelope filled with loose leaf napkins. You name it, it comes. But I do have with me three authors who have completely unleashed themselves, maybe even more than in napkins, and we're thrilled to have them. Amy Bernstein is the author of The Nighthawkers. Shannon Lawrence, the author of The Business of Short Stories. And Susan Cole, the author of Holding Fast. A variety of authors, but we'll start with Amy Bernstein. And our author writes of The Nighthawkers. Archaeologist Pauline Marsh is convinced she's an unlovable freak. Who else in the world shares her ability to locate ancient artifacts without a map, hear their stories, and commune with long dead artisans? But all that changes when handsome, charismatic Gray Henley persuades her she's the girl of his dreams. For Pauline, Gray is the family she never knew. And for Gray, Pauline's treasure-finding skills will make him immensely rich. But the lovers keep secrets from one another that push their relationship to the breaking point. Gray is in league with a criminal relative, and Pauline is visited by another worldly stranger with a message. Sometimes it takes a broken heart to discover your true destiny and find eternal love where you least expect it. Please welcome author Amy Bernstein. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm really delighted to be here with you.
Oh, so thrilled to have you. And I wanted to give our viewers a chance to dive in and say, oh my gosh, where do I sign up? That book sounds fascinating. Love the sound of it. So tell me a little bit behind the inspiration behind this book.
Well, I will venture to say that it's my first foray into the romance genre, and I had so much fun figuring out the relationships, good and bad, figuring out who the villain in the story was, and most of all, doing all this fabulous research into archaeology, because this is a time-traveling archaeology-filled book, and finding all these tremendous artifacts and sort of giving them a romantic life of their own was just really fun.
Oh, I love that. And I know you've written so much before. I didn't realize this was your first foray into romance as well. Was that a little tricky to navigate?
I think every book is tricky to navigate, and I hope that Shannon and Susan would agree with that. But well, I think if you're going, I knew that I had to be true to the best qualities of the genre, but also very much make it my own. And I think in the end, I really did that.
Oh, fantastic. And the archaeology. I mean, I'm a huge buff. I'm on a hope to see, all seven of the ancient wonders and things like that. Were you an archaeology buff from birth, or did you just have this idea and it led you down this rabbit hole?
I've had a lifelong obsession with sort of old things and old places, and have not seen nearly enough of them yet in my lifetime. But I had written a book before this one where archaeology and some illegal digging was a subplot. And I just wasn't done with the subject, and I decided I had to create an entire book around it, and that I really wanted to make it a romance. And so I brought those things together, and I'm really glad I did.
Oh, I'm so glad you did too. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about research. People think that research is something that happens in nonfiction, but you're writing fiction and you did quite a bit of research, I'm sure. Can you tell me a little bit about, like, how do you know, how do you dive in, and where do you decide what is real and what is fiction?
Right. Such great questions. I have a background as a journalist, and I think that I bring a kind of a journalist mindset into all of my books. So I always do research. And what's really fun is when you can uncover a lot of facts. In this case, I was reading Antiquities Journal, Archaeology Journal. I was studying and collecting pictures of real digs and real artifacts. I was reading up on archaeology tools. what do archaeologists use in the field? And then there comes this magic point where you get a handle on some of the real stuff and you bring little bits and pieces of it into the fiction and begin to blend the real and the not real. But the whole trick is to make it completely believable to the reader. And for the reader, it should be a seamless experience. I tapped into some actual real life amazing artifacts in the book that I described, and then others I would invent, and the reader shouldn't be able to tell the difference. So I think it's that kind of wonderful alchemy of fact and fiction seamlessly blending together, but that the author knows enough to convince you, the reader, that you're in a world you can trust.
Absolutely. And as someone who simply likes archaeology but knows nothing about it, you would fool me completely. But you also have that balance that you might have actual archaeologists who are reading it knowing that it's fiction, but you were talking about researching the tools they use and all sorts of things to make sure that those bona fide archaeologists aren't going to sit there and get tripped up and say that's not what we call that digger thing or whatever it might be.
Well, I'm willing to believe that the real archaeologists would all completely roll their eyes, but I did write. That's the thing. I didn't write the book for them because I'm not pretending to be an archaeologist or to
Absolutely.
write. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about writing kind of magical realism is that I get to make the rules and break the rules. And I'm beholden to the reader. The reader has to believe. And as long as I've won that reader over, and so far readers seem to be won over,
Absolutely.
then I've done my job.
Absolutely. And yeah, it certainly is not an archaeology textbook, but often with fiction, those are people who have an interest in that area who end up picking up fiction books. I know for myself, I adore travel. And I'm the first person, if I'm reading about a story that's set in London, to say, that's not where that street is. So they need to make sure that, even in fiction, let's make sure that we put things in the right place. And I know you, as a journalist, are faithful to that, which is so wonderful that you know where you have to be truthful, and then you get to take it after that, which is very, very cool. Are you done with archaeology, or is there going to be another one after this?
Never say never on this one. I could see sneaking it in again and again. So we're just to be decided on that.
Absolutely. Now, tell me about time travel and keeping track, because as a writer, I know fiction writers have a tendency to put themselves firmly in either the I'm winging it by the seat of my pants, or I'm keeping detailed Excel spreadsheets of everything that I'm doing. But when you're dealing with time travel, even if you thought you were winging it, you do need to keep some copious notes here.
Well, yes, but for me, the time travel wasn't that tricky because, unlike, say, complicated time travel in films like Memento and other kinds of films, um, can you hear me? I just had a screen blip.
No, we can.
Okay, good. I may have lost visual, but I can hear you too. Hope you can see me. Um, the um, uh, the time travel is because Pauline Gray, the protagonist, is going way back into deep, deep, deep ancient time, and also traveling into a sort of a parallel universe that's outside of time. I had complete freedom to zip her around anywhere that I wanted, because that's the world of the book that I create. So I didn't have to, fortunately, keep an Excel spreadsheet, which would have done me in on time travel. But there are time travel books that, of course, do that beautifully.
Oh, absolutely. So are you a note taker, or are you let's lie down with a nice drink and see where this goes?
Planner or a pantser. Um, I am definitely a combination, and I certainly had to do quite a bit of plan. I think certainly with romance, when you're writing, you're plotting out relationships, and you have to make sure that there's an emotional arc for the characters, and that you have a happily ever ending. That really does take some planning. So I absolutely did plan. But then moments when you're feeling really inspired, you can sort of go with the flow. And I was so inspired by the archaeology and the beauty of the artifacts that helped.
I love that. I love that. So what's next on your agenda?
Well, I have a dystopian mystery thriller coming out in August from Regal House Publishing, and all this is on my website. One visit to my website shows you all the books and what's happening, and that's just an entirely different thing. It's a sort of a mystery wrapped inside of inside of enigma in a post-pandemic world, and it's sort of a dark book. And what I'd like to say is that I write stories that let you feel, but also make you think, and that's very true of the Potrero Complex coming in August.
Yeah. Amy, tell me, how do you balance so many different types of books? You're here, you're there, your creativity is just astounding, and yet you excel in so many different areas. How do you manage that?
Well, the other way of looking at it is, gosh, why don't I just pick a lane as a writer? And what I feel is that once I find the story that I really want to tell, the story that will not leave me, I just figure out the best way that I can tell that story. And I let the genre sort of follow, I let the story dictate the genre. And I suppose I could write a mystery about archaeology, but I didn't. I wrote a romance about archaeology. I wrote a mystery about a post-pandemic world, and I just sort of let the muse take me where it will. And I enjoy writing in different genres. I find it really exciting.
Well, I know that your publisher may be complaining and wanting you to stay in one lane, but I'm not complaining because I love to see you all over and excelling in every lane that you're in. That's just amazing. Promise me when that next book comes out, you'll join us back here between the covers.
I would love to. Thank you.
And let me remind all of our viewers, amywrites.live is where you can sign up for updates, newsletters. There's all sorts of information there about all of Amy's books. Whatever your genre is, you might find it there. So don't go take a peek over there and get a hold of the Nighthawkers as well as Amy's other books. Speaking of stories, our next author, Shannon Lawrence, wrote The Business of Short Stories: Writing, Submitting, Publishing, and Marketing. And our author writes, whether you're looking to add short stories to your repertoire as a solo pursuit or in addition to novel writing, the business of short stories covers every aspect from writing to marketing. Learn the dynamics of short story writing, where to focus your editing efforts, how and where to submit, how to handle acceptances and rejections, what to do with reprints, and how to market yourself and your stories online and in person. The information in The Business of Short Stories has been distilled from over a decade of short story publishing experience, so you don't have to learn the hard way. You'll find information on submission formatting, cover letters, querying a collection, sending proposals to writing events, how to create a website, SEO, social media, and so much more. This is an invaluable resource for short story writers. Well, as a huge fan of short stories, I'm so thrilled to have Shannon Lawrence here. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm a huge, huge fan of short stories. I mean, partly because one might say I have a very short attention span, but I think
same.
but I think it's a great outlet for writers, fiction writers, for nonfiction business writers. We're constantly telling people that stories is what sells, but it's a great way. If you're not bold like Amy and you're going to dive into a new genre with a whole book, you could test it out. So tell me a little bit about your past with short stories and what brought you to write this book.
Okay, well, yeah, when you get started in the writing world and you're going to conferences and workshops and all of that, the emphasis is always on novels. So you're only a writer if you're doing novels, basically. And it's just not true. While, there are other ways to get into the writing world. And so I got in fully, I was working on a novel and I had all these ideas all the time. Like you said, short attention span. I always have ideas. And some of them you just have to write. And I started then submitting short stories while I was doing stuff and kind of learning the process. And there wasn't a lot out there about doing it. So, I mean, you figure that out through feel. And so at this point, I've had, I don't know, over 50 short stories published in magazines and anthologies. And when they come back, it's just done, and then I bundled them together, the ones I'd gotten my rights back on, and I put out my first collection, and it just went from there. So, because that's a way to kind of reclaim those stories that somebody else published for you. And that a lot of times in short stories, you're getting a flat fee at the beginning, And that's it. You're not going to make royalties off it. So once you have that pay, you're done.
That's right.
Or you can take those back and do all kinds of things with them to keep
Really,
going.
I'm so glad you're talking about what else you can do with them, because, like you said, you put it out there. That shouldn't be the end of it.
No.
Let's give that short story a whole other life. And there's so many ways that you can use that.
There really are now. We're living in a time where we're really lucky to be able to do all kinds of things. And that's whether it's reselling it as a reprint to another market, or you can put a short story on Amazon and just have that short story out there for 99 cents or something like that, or you can bundle it into collections. There's various things you can do. We're creatives, so figuring out creative uses for our work is something that we can be doing.
And it seems like every day there's some new possibility, whether it's serialization or other publishing avenues that, whether they wanted something in long form broken down or a short story's already broken down. So there you have it.
Oh yeah, I'm watching Bella with interest. I've got some friends that have, been in there pioneering that. So.
Oh, good. You'll have to report back after you find out how, once they tested the waters there. Now tell me about your own short story journey. Just like a novel, there are genres and tropes and certain things. There's pantsers and plotters. Doesn't matter if you're writing 80,000 words or 8,000 words. So tell me a little bit about your favorite journeys that short stories have brought you on.
Well, so I write primarily horror. That's really where it is for me. Everything, any story idea that comes, it can always take a dark turn. But I will say I've had a couple of mysteries come out lately, which has been fun because I just thought, well, let me try this out. And I've had good luck with that so far. But yeah, just in general, it's brought me into the horror world and the writing world in a way that surprised me at the beginning, because I kind of thought I'd be an outsider because I was doing the short stories and I just wasn't following that journey that most authors were. But at no point have I been treated in the writing community like I'm not doing this, the same thing, that I'm not part of the community. And it's amazing. So, because I just remember being really tentative about that at the beginning and getting approached for stuff and being like, okay, but I just do short stories, really, right? And they're like, yeah,
don't apologize. Never apologize. Never.
No, not anymore. But that's what it took, because I had to gain that footing.
Apologize, don't explain.
That's right.
No. You are absolutely right. In fact, if anything, I think that short story writers have a much larger challenge in some ways. You really need to pick and choose. You've got to get us, loving or hating your characters in a matter of sentences instead of in a matter of pages or chapters or even sections. I mean, you've got to get us involved. If I'm on page 3 and I'm not totally sucked in already and turning those pages, you failed me. And then you've got to wrap it all up with a bow, in just another couple of thousand words, and you're in, you're out. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And you got to get them in right away. You've got a matter of maybe 2 paragraphs to catch somebody, because that's one thing that people have to learn, is that you don't have, you might go, well, if they give this much time to a novel, why wouldn't they give that much time to a short story? No, if they've sat down to write or to read a short story,
that's right,
they want that story and they want it now. And you have to be able to build character and setting in that paragraph, basically.
One paragraph.
Yeah. And so that, because otherwise they're going to move on. That's the thing. If you're reading short stories, you've got, a whole book sitting in front of you of short stories, and you can skip it if it doesn't take you in. So
exactly, your opening sentence matters so much more, I'll say, than in a novel. I mean, that sentence right off the bat, we have to be in. You're taking an entire story arc, and it's not like you could just say, "Oh, I'll just use this much." No. You have to get that entire thing in.
That's right. Full story arc. That's one of the things I stress the hardest. It's a full story. You're not doing a vignette. You're not just doing a portion of a story. It still has to have a full story arc.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and honestly, I think that just dabbling in short stories, even if you don't submit them, although why not, right? Because if you could sell it, why not sell it? But it's a great way also to hone your writing skills for novel writing too, I think. So if you have to figure out how to get established character and setting in a short story, that's going to help you be able to establish that when you have more room to do it. And just think it's so much fun when you actually have that room to do it and go, wait, I can add some more details about this.
That's the thing. Sometimes people will write a short story and realize they have a lot more living to do through those characters, whether it's backstory, ad story, fleshing out whatever it might be, and they may decide out of 20 short stories they wrote, this is the one that keeps poking them at night.
Yeah,
add more.
it's true. And I've seen, we'll say, oh, Carrie Vaughn writes I think it's the Kitty, and I don't remember the last name, but Kitty Werewolf series. And it started out as a short story that people really liked. And she said, well, I'm going to dive into this world. She ended up with a whole successful series. And that was started off of a short story. And she's one of the people who's successful in novels and is still been involved in the short story world. You know, I mean, Stephen King's an obvious example of that. His short stories, even people who don't like his novels like his short stories, you know, and though it's his short stories that get made into movies a lot of the time.
Exactly, because they have to do so much with a movie. They don't need to start with a 600-page novel to boot.
No, because then you got to split it up. You do like the Harry Potter ones and split it up into a bunch.
Oh, well, I'm so delighted that you are doing the deep dive, not just with your own short story writing, but with helping other short story writers, because a lot of people really don't know where to go. If you want to learn more about the business of short stories, or contact Shannon yourself to learn firsthand, please visit thewarriormuse.com. You can learn more about Shannon, get in contact, and get your own short story writing. And just a little plug for us over here at Red Penguin Books, we do publish probably about 15 short story anthologies a year. So we are always on the lookout for short story writers. So if you're interested, please visit us, but certainly grab a copy of The Business of Short Stories: Writing, Submitting, Publishing, and Marketing. Our final author today, Susan Cole, is the author of Holding Fast, a memoir of sailing, love, and loss. And our author writes, the story of leaving everything behind to follow her husband's lifelong dream of sailing away. Many people dream of escaping reality, but few actually go. Blonde, blue-eyed, irreverent John bursts into Susan's life in her 20s with a dream of sailing off. Susan dreams of settling down and doesn't want to go. A 3-year voyage with their young daughter profoundly changes their lives. A gripping adventure story and an inspirational memoir of finding our power in the unlikeliest of places. Please welcome author Susan Cole. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness, 3 years aboard a boat just by itself is quite the accomplishment. But then all of the living that went into this. When you were actually on the boat, is that when you were doing the writing, or was it reflection afterwards?
It was reflection afterwards, but on the boat, I did keep a journal, and we also actually have it with me because it's part of my inspiration. We kept boat logs. So where we, you know, on one side you write all the sailing information like the wind speed and the boat position and all, but on the other side, each of us wrote our impressions. It wasn't even just my husband, but my daughter and I did too. We were with our daughter who, she was 7 when we started.
Wow. Take me back to your life before this journey, before your husband, before everything else. Had you ever sailed?
No.
Like,
I was from Ohio, and
oh my God.
I've never sailed.
Had you ever even been on a boat?
Never been on a boat other than a rowboat, you know, at camp or something. No. But so I met John, my husband, at work, and in my 20s, we were both in our 20s. We were both married to other people. We'd each married very, very young to the wrong people. And after a few years, we got together. But from when I first met him, he grew up in Connecticut, and he sailed on Long Island Sound. He sailed from when he was 4, and he just loved sailing. He spun all these tales of sailing that really, intrigued me. And I once I went sailing with him, I loved sailing with him.
Wow, wow. You loved sailing, but sailing for 3 years, that wasn't quite what you were expecting.
No, well, no, because I have to say I was in a lot of denial. I mean, he was clear about his dream from when we
Was he really? It wasn't something sprung on you after the engagement. It was
no,
like,
it wasn't sprung. And we also had, before we had our daughter, I had my daughter late in life. I was 42. And we had lived on boats for 15 years. We lived first on an old ferry boat, an original Fire Island 1903 ferry boat. We lived out in Long Island Sound.
no.
Yeah. Yeah, and that eventually sank. We lived on it for 5 years. And every time we took it out, smoke would curl from the engine, or
Oh my gosh.
steering would part. And we get to the dock, and John's famous saying was, "Cheated death again." And when we were on that boat, his captain's hat was like a jester's hat with those legs and bells.
Oh my.
Because it was really hard to handle, and he was a sailor. And our next boat was a really heavy Norwegian sailboat that was very, very hard to sail because it was so heavy. It weighed 50 tons. That was a real challenge as well. And eventually the deck leaked on that so much. And meanwhile, our careers, we were working in New York. So, I mean, we had good clothes. Our careers had advanced from when we were hippies.
Living on a sailboat and working in New York.
Yeah. And so, we'd have to call in, water's coming in the bilge, where we can't come in today, or, we're pumping out the bilge, something like that. And then I finally talked him into a house, and then we had a daughter. And I was thinking, well, maybe he'll forget that old dream. No. And after, and to be honest, he never indicated that he was going to forget it, but that was just my, my thing. And after about 3 years in the house, we began to look for a much sturdier ocean going vessel that could take us further. We had no experience sailing offshore, or we'd only sailed in Long Island Sound. Before
So
we
the
left.
first time you sailed in the ocean was to start this journey?
From Florida, yeah. I mean, we've sailed, a little tiny, we've gone to Block Island, which is 20 miles off the shore, but that's really,
Yeah.
we had never sailed overnight or done any, ocean sailing.
And there you were. So you bought the sailboat in Florida. Is that where you took off from? Because
We bought it in Florida, but we brought it back up north. We had a truck back up north, and John just worked on it nights and weekends. I helped, but it was really, his thing. He learned how to replace wiring. He, really major stuff. And he really his thing was wind and waves and sailing. So he had to learn all this mechanical and electrical stuff. And then because we were going to be out there, and he wanted to have that knowledge. So I think we had it for 3 years, and then then John and a couple of guys, we hired a captain and my nephew took it down from Connecticut to Annapolis, and that was where John and Kate and I moved on the boat. We drove down from Connecticut with our dog and cat and all of our boxes, and moved on the boat.
so you lived on a boat with a dog and a cat also?
Yes, they were on our voyage with us. The dog is like a character in the book. He was just a really great dog. The cat, very sadly, hated the water, just hated sailing. She would just be up hissing, at a little corner of the boat, and she disappeared. And this is awful.
No,
We don't have to talk about that.
we won't talk about that. I was just a little incredulous as a cat owner, thinking about, wow.
Yeah, no.
Wow.
Yeah,
So,
I'm a cat owner now too. No.
just to get the timeline straight, you were 49 years old when you got on this boat with a child and 2 animals and the husband.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And our careers were really taking off. We were, I was in market research, I had my own business. John was at a very large advertising agency in New York. He worked for big agencies, and but we took off, and we kept working, actually, just so we would have some money coming in. We took on freelance projects. while
You
we were
didn't have Wi-Fi, did you?
no, it was in the 90s. It was in the late 90s.
I mean, that's what I was like. How do you work remotely?
That's why, I mean, I think we were digital nomads before the digital nomads.
Right, right. Like,
We'd have to go, like in Guatemala, there was this little internet cafe with 2 computers, you know, and all the locals and the boaters were trying to, and email had just started. This was in mid to late 90s. So yeah, but it was kind of fun to do that too.
oh, you know, wow. I just, and to think that you were doing this and you weren't like, you know, like a little naive 25-year-old who's like, I could do anything. You were 49 years old.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
just the exhaustion level is just unbelievable.
That's what I was thinking.
You know
So,
what I'm saying?
I'm 44 and I'm just like, oh, but I'm tired.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like a boat itself, you know, if you go out on a boat for an afternoon, you come home and you're just kind of like, wow, that was a lot, you know. But to think about, you know, and the dog and the kid and the husband. Well, I'm just tired meeting you, Susan.
You know, it was a lot, but it also, when you're out on the water, there's just such a feeling of freedom. And, you know, we didn't have any set plan. I mean, where we would go next, we might meet somebody, say in Isla Mujeres, and they told us about a great place down the coast. And so there was that aspect too, that was
You
so,
didn't have a plan?
we were not big planners. We're both right-brained, you know, more creative.
Worse than writing a book as a pantser. I mean, getting into a boat with a kid and a dog and no plan. I'm just incredulous. I have a plan if I go to the drugstore, you know?
Yeah. When we left, you know, we were saying our goodbyes to, because we had a lot of close relatives. John's sister lived in Connecticut, and nieces and all. So we went to say goodbye to my sister and brother-in-law. Just, we were in our van. I was following with our Honda, the animals. And we were leaving boxes with her as well. My brother-in-law had been in the Navy, and he was basically a Connecticut guy. He just, other than being in the Navy, he'd never been out of Connecticut. And he was just so worried that we didn't know where we were going. We knew we were going south, you know. And we had studied different places. We had an idea, but just that he was just so worried for us. I remember leaving, and I was thinking, oh, I wonder if I should be worried. So, yeah.
Well, you and your husband certainly met the right person, because if I were on that boat, I'd want a complete, what time are we arriving at this port, and do we have a reservation? You know?
Right. It's so not like that when you're actually sailing, because like you know, here at the tops of these pages, it'll say, you know, where did you go from and where did you go to? And very often the two will be crossed out because the weather was terrible, or, you know, you wound up someplace else because of things you couldn't control, like the weather, or, you know, other things, something going wrong on the boat. And then you'd have to, one of the challenges to me and thing that I found interesting was when we did have a minor crisis or whatever, just figuring it out, you know, and getting ourselves out of it. We'd always, like, John's first reaction would always be, we are screwed. We are so screwed. And he'd sit there with these giant electrical books or engine books where he did not feel like an expert, although he had learned a lot. And he might stay up all night, you know, reading the thing. And then by the morning he, you know, had an idea, and then together we would figure out how to make it happen, like who we needed to call or just whatever. So
unbelievable. Tell me a little bit about the writing process now. The trip itself, I mean, just mind-boggling. But you came home, you had this big journal. How long after you returned home did you say, this should be a book, and you sat down to work on it?
It was a couple of years after, actually. I went to a local writing workshop, and I found myself writing about it. And then I just wanted to write about it. And then a friend who was a playwright, she was also in advertising, told me about the Iowa Writers Workshop, which I started to go to in summers. And that really helped, you know, just to hone the writing. I mean, I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I went in another direction. And then I just kept writing, and from the time I started, it was probably 15 years till the time I finished. So I was a different person. I had just had a, you know, different perspective, and the story changed as well, because when I started, I was, you know, I wasn't presenting our flaws. I was presenting it like we were the heroes of the sea kind of thing, which was not the case at all. We made so many mistakes. We had so many near crises. I also, like, as an example, we because we had no offshore experience, we hired a captain, thank God, to help. Because when you go out there and you have never sailed out there, it's just like, and we didn't, at that time we had no radar. Later on, there was radar and all this other stuff. So it's really scary. So for longer passages, we always hired him. I did in my first drafts, it was like he wasn't there. I mean, I just vaguely referred to him as a friend, you know. So by the time I finished, it was a much more honest, and I think really richer and interesting book of what our in my own conflicts and what our experiences actually were.
Wow. That brings me to something so interesting when you talk about being a different person when you start something as when you finish. Now, sometimes it's because, like in your case, it did take a long time that you were writing this, but even if you're writing something, as short as, Shannon's stories, it doesn't get written in 15 minutes. I mean, that's for sure. And you do evolve as a person. Talk to me a little bit about evolving as a person, as a writer. Amy, I think you have evolved as a person through your books. How has that changed you with this new book that you just came out with, as opposed to if you look back at your earlier books?
Like Susan, first of all, I'm fascinated by both of your stories as writers. And you've both written such incredibly valuable books, and writing short stories is remarkably difficult. It's funny, I can't do it. I can write long, I can't write short. I've tried, it hasn't worked out that well. It's truly an art form unto itself, and I'm definitely in awe. And Susan, your experience is it's just remarkable, and I'm so glad that you were able to write about it and to share that. Incredible. Loved hearing from both of you. I didn't turn to fiction until I was a fairly mature person. I was always a writer in nonfiction, journalist, and communications and marketing and all this other stuff, and I really didn't turn to writing fiction seriously till I was really, at or past even the mid-century mark. And so I think you bring your life experiences to it at that point, which I think is very enriching. And then with each book, it's true, Stephanie, with each book, you change a bit. You change a bit as a writer, if not as a person, because you learn things about yourself each time you finish a book.
Yeah, absolutely. And this last one that you just wrote, with the relationship aspect being such a primary focus in there, it really causes you to reflect. And I'm sure how you feel about romance at this stage in your life, if this book had been written 20 years ago, is a very different perspective.
I think that's true. I think younger romance writers, we always write from what we know, right? I mean, to some extent, even with our imaginations in play. And so if you don't have my experience in a relationship, you're going to write about relationships from a younger perspective. It's just going to play out differently. Yes, it's true.
And maybe a more, I hate to say optimistic perspective, but
I have become rather cynical in my old age, I will say.
I mean, it's just part of reality. Shannon, you're writing short stories, and I'm guessing that your evolution might not be, within a book. Like Susan is talking about how the first draft differed from the final product 15 years later. But for you, you are leaving a whole legacy of short stories. Tell me about a little bit of evolution that you might see looking back.
Here's the thing on that is I've realized that I kind of have gone through phases in it, especially when I was sticking to a genre, because I've had short memoir, short humor, short sci-fi published too, but again, it usually comes back to horror. But I went through the periods where looking back, I can see what I was exploring personally in those. And for example, maybe it was the earlier stories were a little harsher, maybe a little more gore, a little more this. And then I went through this psychological period where it was all exploration, and it would be this one character. And so I do think that I've evolved through that too. And I don't know if that would have happened if I weren't writing so many in that way, or maybe it would have on a smaller scale. But yeah, I did notice that. I'm like, oh, clearly this was a phase.
Yes, yes, and it must be kind of interesting to look back and say, that was interesting right there. I mean, it happens, and especially, you're quite prolific. So if you're going to be writing a lot, you get to see patterns, shall we say.
Yes. And sometimes it's intentional in that I'd learn about something or I'd read a story and it just made me think, I want to try something like this or similar to this, or I want to try this. I just recently wrote my first cyberpunk story because I went, well, if you're writing short stories, you should be challenging yourself. I mean, if you're writing at all, you should be challenging yourself. Let's be clear on that. But yeah, I just think I should be using that and trying in as many different things as I can and seeing what there is more to discover, because there's always going to be something and there's always a new genre, and it's kind of amazing being able to do that and to play. And I love that about Amy too, is that I think it's encouraging that each of your stories has been a different genre, because that gets pounded down so much for people. I think that was part of what turned me, and I'm still interested in novels and I'm writing one now, but it kind of turned me because it was so much fun to just get to play and to dabble and to experiment and explore. And I love that you can show that people can do that with novels.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Writing should be fun.
It should.
Be fun. Absolutely. You know, Susan, you had mentioned the evolution of your story, and it sounds in a nutshell like your first one when you said you were the heroes of the sea. You barely mentioned the other guy, you know, and you've kind of moved to a more authentic picture, shall we say, of all of this, which is unbelievably commendable, because most of us would still want to hang on to that. You know, the three of us on the call think you're a hero, man. I can't even imagine. And I actually like boating, but the thought of, you know, what you did is, I like boating for like 3 hours, and that was pretty great. Back to land. But now that you have worked so hard on this memoir off of this huge experience, what are you going to write next? Hopefully more.
Yeah. No, I am working on something. And I think my dad died when I was very young, but he had a huge influence on me. And I was left in not a very good situation with my mother. And it's not something I've really wanted to look at too much earlier, but I think, and John, I'll just mention, sadly, he passed away a few years ago. So that's affected my
Of course.
feelings also about finishing the book and the sailing book and this book. I have started working on.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that the sailing book is not the end of your writing.
Yeah, I guess I'm so interested in both of in Shannon and Amy. You're doing so many different things. I'm kind of I like writing from my actual experience, although I have had some fiction classes that have been so much fun. So I don't know, it's something
No,
to
I
think
think
about.
Well, I think as writers, it's totally fine for each of us to gravitate what fits best. I mean, it's kind of like going into a store with lots of beautiful clothes. And if you're not the kind of person who's going to put on a mod print mini dress, well, that's fine. Let somebody else wear that, and you can wear the maxi skirt. I mean, we do have intuitive lanes, and I think it's wonderful, and we can experiment. But I think we also find where our best fit is as writers. And I'll say I'm also a nonfiction book coach, and so as someone who coaches other writers sort of through their journey, I mean, memoir is such a special thing, and only some people can really write that well. It's not the genre for everybody, and I think, Susan, it sounds like such a natural fit for you. And it's hard writing about that tough past personal stuff. It's so hard, and if you have that ability to excavate that um, in an authentic, shareable way, I mean, I think that's a thing unto itself. Just like being able to knock out a 7,500 word short story is like a superpower. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, it is interesting having the three of you, a successful novelist, a successful short story writer, and a memoirist. They are each, like you said, Amy, so different and such a unique skill set to be able to do that, to be able to bring an authentic experience to life in a way that people want to read it, to be able to bring stories to life in just a few sentences so you can suck them in, and to be able to be in various genres and for the long haul, so that 70,000, 80,000 words, they still want to keep turning those pages. Each one of those is its own unique skill set. And it's fun to try others. And it's fun to sometimes, like you said, Amy, stay in your lane just because it's where you are and you are comfortable. What I would love, since we want people to know who should be reading your books. Now, of course, I can listen to any of you and say, well, I think everybody should read your books because they're just wonderful. But could you describe for us who, if I had a gift list right now, Shannon, can you tell me who on my gift list I should be thinking about for the business of short stories?
Anybody who wants to maybe try and just try it out, have a little fun and figure that out, or anybody who is a novelist and wants to be able to look into that and see if they could learn how to do that as well. The marketing aspect takes up probably about a third of the book. It ended up being more than I had planned, but I have found that novelists have come to me and said that they got it and they use it just for the marketing section. So there's just some categories right there. But yeah, if you're dabbling in short stories or if you want to, check it out.
Shannon, I'm so glad that the marketing section takes up a third of the book, because every writer I meet thinks when they first start that it ended once the book was written. Once they wrote the end, they thought they were done. And then they discovered, much to their dismay, that the word marketing was much bigger and scarier and time consuming than they thought. So the fact that you said almost apologetically, the marketing section's a third of the book, is a huge, huge selling feature, because that is such a major part of short stories and all stories. So I thank you for that. And that's a great plug for the book so that people know what you're getting, which is important stuff. Susan, who should I be buying a copy of Holding Fast, a memoir of sailing, love, and loss?
Well, anyone who's interested in the water and, sailing or boating, first is an obvious segment, but really anyone who is thinking of making a life change, or who's feeling stuck and taking a leap of faith, because that's what I did.
Yes, yes.
And I write about it. And also people who are interested in different slice of life. This is the cruising sailing world. And it's really pretty interesting. And you're immersed in it. So that's who I would, and I guess more women. I mean, but although men are reading it too, but I would say more women.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the people who are experiencing or looking at a change of life, because, quite frankly, that represents a lot of people, whether it is just because of age or opportunity, or, even our recent, pandemic has caused a lot of people to reevaluate their life and their life's choices, and whether your change of life leads you to be on a boat or something else. I think that's incredibly valuable, and I have a lot of people I know who are considering changing their life, so I thank you so much for that. Amy, tell us a little bit about who I should be buying a copy of The Nighthawkers for.
You would think that I'm going to say all the women who read romance fiction, and actually what I've really learned is um, that is an audience, but it really isn't the only audience for this book. Several men have told me how much they've enjoyed this book, and
Ooh.
I think that's because there really is some science in it. I mean, not a lot, but it's in there. Let me put it this way: it's not super mushy, because that's not going to be my style as an author. And as I think I said earlier, even with this book, I do write stories that let you feel, but also make you think. And this does that, because the book really is so much more. It really is about love and loss and finding your purpose. And I think that anyone who's looking for a really kind of a great summer or a beach read or a pretty quick read, and a story that will just sort of take you out of the world that we're in right now, which is not a very fun place to be on a day-to-day basis in many ways. And to a place that's going to sort of have some warmth, but also depth to it. It is an escapist read, but it's also it's got some solid underpinnings and some heart to it. So I would say it's a great piece of fiction to escape to, and not just for those who love romance. It's a nice gift book for almost any reader.
Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned men, because that certainly from your cover on, I think that you're absolutely right. And that's a good reader segment. I thank the three of you for giving us a little peek into your books. All of them sound like something we want to be reading. A beach, a boat, wherever your summer may take you, and for our readers out there, but also for our writers out there. Thank you, Shannon, for supporting our writers out there. And the three of you were a huge inspiration. So thank you so much for joining us between the covers. Please keep in touch. And as our authors are going to be releasing books, doing events and such, certainly please do share links and all of that with us so we can share them with our audience. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us on Between the Covers. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're an author who would be interested in appearing on our show, or perhaps you're a member of a book club, we do host book clubs as well, please visit betweenthecoverstv.com. By the way, at betweenthecoverstv.com, you can watch past episodes in addition to learning more about our authors and guests. So sign up there if you would like to be a guest on the show yourself. And if you have some books that you would like to get written or published, visit redpenguinbooks.com. Thanks so much for joining us.